All right, so I need to. I'm going to mention one thing before I start mentioning some prayer requests. So I'm told that we have 58 cards. volunteers to help out with the children. You got a place to sit and relax while you're helping. So it's not too tiring now when she asks you. How's that sound? All right, let's go to God together in prayer. Dear gracious God, we are so thankful for the blessings of life. And as we come together in this sanctuary and in our homes, for those who are watching on YouTube, we can see the light still coming into the sanctuary and from our windows, because it is 6 o'clock at night and it is still light. And we realize we are halfway out of winter and halfway towards spring. We're thankful for the changes of the season and the way in which you have created this world that we experience for life. And with the changes of the season and just the miraculous wonder of life on earth. Soon we will see the bits of spring coming up out of the ground and from buds on trees. And within a matter of days, our whole landscape will be green. Where does that come from? We know the science, we can read about it, we can teach our grandchildren and children about it. It is still amazing. I think, dear Lord, about the way in which NASA put this new telescope beyond the Earth's orbit of the sun, the Webb telescope, which will look back to the farthest points of the universe. Look back 13 billion years in time, so that we may see some of the wonders and the clues of how you created all of this. Like the psalmist, we find ourselves looking to the heavens, the work of your fingers, your stars and your moons that you placed, and we wonder, what are humans that you are mindful of us? That you went to all this creation that we might have life, and through Jesus have it abundantly. Out of those 13 billion years, most of that time, planets and stars collected and created orbits, and then Earth was created to circle around the sun. And only in a short blip did life come on this earth, and in even a shorter blip did you create us. Oh God, we are stunned at the miracle that each of our lives are. And we thank you for the blessing to live and to have family and to love and to laugh. We know this life comes with hardships, but boy, it also comes with such wondrous blessings. Help us when the days are difficult, that we do not forget the blessings you have given us and the wonders of life. And help us to be people that know how to share our blessings. We thank you, O God, for prayers of thanksgiving that we are offering up and have already mentioned today. For Mary Cannon and for Kathy Teague. For those who are facing surgery. Denise Hawkins. And Ashley. For people who need strength in recovery, for Penny Lippard and Doug Mullis. for those who are grieving. For Elizabeth Curtis's family, and particularly for Cecilia Broom. For the family of Blakely, whose life was cut short. For Steve Washam, and for the family that grieves him. Oh God, we lift up all these prayers for surgery, for recovery, of thanksgiving, and for grief. And in doing so, we embrace this life that begins and ends. And between the beginning and the end are full of ways in which we can celebrate your praises and blessings as we share your transformative faith and your good news of peace and justice. For all these things, we pray. In Christ Jesus, amen. So I thought I better have a cup of water up here. I don't know if you noticed, but Sunday, by the time I got to the end of my sermon, my voice was about gone. And I thought, I've just turned 60 and I'm falling apart. So I had some water today. So, all right, tonight we're going to look at the parable of the rich fool. And this is a shorter parable. So I only have 3 pages of notes. Last week I had 6 pages of notes, and we did not get to all that. So it is a shorter parable. Nonetheless, is a very rich parable, and I think has some pieces in its story that may not be apparent to us, and we'll have to think of some other stories in the Bible to help us get there. So we'll see if I can do an adequate job of that. So in Luke chapter 12, beginning with verse 13, we will look at how this parable was framed. In this case, Luke gives us a background for the parable. So we're going to look first at verses 13 through 15. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And then he said to them, so the one brother is close by, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." So, I mentioned that Luke brought these two together as an introduction to the parable, and we wonder if Luke purposely did that, because in the Gospel of Thomas, and I know Thomas is not in the Bible, he got left out, but not because of what Dan Brown said in his movie. What was that movie called? Oh, shoot. It's about 10 years ago. Anyways, so the Gospel of Thomas is one of the Gnostic Gospels that probably was written around 100 AD, possibly just before or just after the Gospel of John. It is important to us as biblical scholars and students because it's a gospel of sayings. That's pretty much all it is sayings. There's a few things that Jesus does, but most of it is Jesus' teachings. And what's fascinating is a lot of what we see in Matthew and Luke that were the shared information between the two, in which some scholars think they got that information from another source, and scholars have just called it Q for no other reason, that Thomas has many of the same stories. So it gives us another way to see how these stories passed around in the early church. So, today's passage is also in the Gospel of Thomas. But this little dialogue between these brothers and Jesus is in one section, story 73, and the parable is in a different section, story 63. But in Luke, they're together. So we don't know if they were together and Luke kept them together and Thomas separated them, or they were separate and Luke brought them together, but it keeps this in mind. Some reason Luke wanted us to read this interchange between the brothers and Jesus before we read the parable. So let's think about, what does this get our mind thinking about before we read the parable? There's four characters here: Jesus, the two brothers, one who speaks, the other one who's there, because it says them, but he doesn't speak, and the crowd who's watching all this. The brothers have a disagreement about their inheritance, right? Because he says, Jesus, make my brother share this with me. Okay. The one who's not sharing is silent. There's a surprise. We can assume that the brother's parents, or at least the father, has died recently, and this disagreement reveals a tension and a problem in the family. Jesus warns them with a proverb and then tells them a parable. So, what has the death of their parents revealed about the relationship of these brothers? Not very close. And why do we suspect that?
Well, they've gone to an outsider to get a resolution rather than sit down and talk between themselves.
Right. If they did talk, they couldn't work it out. And then they didn't go to family members. As you said, Dickie, they went to outsiders. So as Max says, they've got a problem. They don't get along too well. And this has manifested itself in a disagreement about money. Has anybody ever seen that happen in families after death? Yeah. I know it's all y'all's cousins and none of y'all's family, but that's all right. I'm curious, what do you think the crowd is thinking about these two brothers who are there listening to this? Maybe just ask you all, what are you all thinking about these two brothers? What should brothers be doing at a time like this? I'm sorry, page. Not bickering. They should be consoling each other. Right. I'll bet every single one of us in this room has lost a loved one. We know what that's like. We know the psalmist calls it the valley of the shadow of death for a reason. But rather than consoling each other, strengthening each other, they're bickering. They're arguing with each other. So, the crowd is probably like you all and wondering what's wrong with these guys, and probably are not having a great feeling about these two. So what are they thinking about before Jesus enters the parable? What are you thinking about now that we've brought this up? A personal matter, yes. And a personal matter that seems to be greedy, out of portion, not appropriate for the time. Yeah. So we're all wondering, what's wrong with these people? Yeah. They're selfish in one way about their inheritance. They're also selfish about taking up Jesus' time with a family matter. Yeah. Oh. So maybe they were acknowledged Jesus as a place of authority, as a rabbi. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Missy. Hadn't thought about that. That's good.
I was reading
Okay.
And the church elders settled it. Jesse left the church for 7 years, came back.
So they were using Jesus like your ancestors used the church. All right. Okay. Maybe they use this passage as inspiration, Bill. All right. So we're thinking about money. We're thinking about families. We're thinking about inappropriate feelings or reactions. All right. Let's hop into the parable and see what we have here. So the actual parable begins with verse 16. Then Jesus told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, what should I do? For I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? And there ends the parable. Don't read ahead to that last verse. All right, we're going to first up kind of hit the plot, although I have to cheat a little bit and do a little bit of character stuff, and then we'll get to the character. So the story starts off with good news, right? A rich man's yield has an abundant crop. But then comes the tension in the story. This rich man says, what shall I do? For I have no place to store my crops. An abundant crop brings a problem. This rich man does not have enough inventory space for his harvest. So this is where we're going to get a little bit of character stuff, but it's for plot purposes, I promise you. We're going to assume, since this is a rich man, and he owns a Texas-sized ranch, the word that's used for his land indicates this. We're going to assume he's a smart business person, right? We're going to assume he got this not by inheritance, but he actually worked and knows how to plan. So, how is it that a rich rancher businessman did not know how much space he had to have in his silos for his harvest? How is that possible? Because it wasn't just like he had a little bit extra, right? He had so much extra that he tore down. He didn't just add space, he tore down his silos that he had, and he built bigger ones. We don't know how much of this is a part of a story, but we're going to assume this is an extreme investment. So, how is it that he could have mismanaged himself so badly?
Well, maybe he wasn't anticipating as good a crop
Okay.
as what actually materialized.
He didn't anticipate it. Anybody want to help Dickie here why he didn't anticipate this great amount? Because this is a huge, 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 huge amount compared to what he's supposed to have. The weather was great. That's right. Okay. All right. Not like this past Monday. Yeah, we're going to come to that. Don't get his head out. We're going to come to that one near the end.
I can only tell a story about a tomato farmer, which I need you to know this story. That one year, everything just came out perfect. The freeze that made the buds larger.
Uh-huh.
And the dew and the timing and the weather were the biggest, plumpest, rightest tomatoes that the guy ever had. And it was the years and years of raising tomatoes. It was the year his ship came in, if you will.
All right?
The stars and moon just aligned in that harvest.
Okay, so if we can take Kevin's story here, is there one word we could use for something like that? Blessed? Miraculous, right? Maybe a miracle. So this is a miraculous harvest. Such not even a smart, rich businessman rancher could ever anticipate. And such a big thing, he could tear down all his barns, not reuse them, and add new ones, tear them down, and have brand spanking best technology stuff he's ever had. It's a miracle. That's a key to understanding the story. This is so abundant, it was no person could expect it. I know you all are good Bible readers. Can you think of an Old Testament story where miraculous crops were involved in the story?
7 years of plenty in Egypt.
In Egypt, yes. Pharaoh had a dream. Joseph interpreted the dream and said, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have 7 years of enormous harvests. And what was Joseph's words to Pharaoh about this great harvest that he would have for 7 straight years? Anybody remember what that was? What was he supposed to do? What was Pharaoh supposed to do?
He was supposed to put enough aside to serve for the next 7 years that were going to be lean years.
Yes, he was supposed to build big barns, right? So he could put all that grain, all that harvest, so that it could be used over a period of time when 7 years of famine came. So the story of the Old Testament, that all those people, all those Jewish peasants who've been listening to stories all their lives about the Old Testament, they knew that story, and they knew that when a miracle harvest comes, you're supposed to be like Joseph told Pharaoh, and you're supposed to build big barns and put all the grain in there so that the grain could get them through 7 lean years. And who would the grain be used for? The people, right? The people, right. Wasn't for Pharaoh, it was for the people. So the people are hearing the story of Jesus, and they're thinking, okay, I know where this story's going. Jesus is telling a story about a man who was blessed just like God blessed Pharaoh and Joseph to help everyone get through the years, the lean years, the famine years that were coming. That's where this story's going. But then there's a plot twist, right? How do Joseph's instructions to Pharaoh compare to the rich man's instructions to himself?
Well, the rich man's instructions were totally selfish. He's putting it away for him. Everything is about him. He's the center of the universe. But for Pharaoh, he was putting it aside for the Egyptian people.
Yep. So the huge contrast, the twist in the story is the rich man is thinking only of himself. Whereas Pharaoh, because of Joseph's counsel, saved the grain for all the people, and not just for the Egyptian people, because what happens near the end of the story later on? Joseph's family comes to Egypt. And because they had this wealth of grain, even during a time of famine, they could share it with immigrants. So then even the people of God were blessed by the grain. So this man, the story has taken a big plot twist. This man is doing the opposite of what Joseph told Pharaoh to do, and in fact what Pharaoh did. So let's think about this crowd again. What is the crowd, mostly Jewish peasants, what are they thinking about this rich man and how he is managing this miraculous crop?
And live off of his goods, and maybe he's not going to be farming anymore,
Yep.
and maybe the workers all going to be put out.
They're going to lose their jobs, and that man, he must have a big appetite because he's got a lot of grain to eat. because he's not sharing it. So the crowd is thinking the same kind of thing about this rich man in the story, that they're wondering, these two brothers got a problem. And the two brothers' problem is coming out in this story about this rich man who thinks about himself only. The crops, if we follow the story about Joseph, were meant for the people. And this rich man is not going to share them with the people. All right, let's think about the character some more. We're going to look at the rich man's character some more. We already described him as owning a Texas-sized ranch. And he's got enough money, or at least borrowing power, that he can tear down all his barns and build bigger ones. Yeah, I just messed it up once, Kevin. I can't say. Out of cost 60, I can't even speak. So he's this rich man, and he has this big farm, and he is mismanaging this miracle. Now, last week we talked about the prodigal son and the other two parables that were just before that. Who wants to remind everybody, what did the shepherd and the housewife and the father do? What did they do when they found what they had lost? They celebrated, right? Each of those parables has a big celebration to it. Now, does this man celebrate? So, Jay? Right, yeah, he doesn't get there, but he does say something to himself, right? Yeah, so he, in his own way, is going to celebrate, but it's not the same kind of celebration the others had, right? How is his celebration different from the ones we saw last week?
He didn't throw a party because he didn't spend that money.
That's right.
Extra.
His party was just for himself. He pulled up his TV and cranked up his microwave, had his food and his drink, and he was set. Last week, everybody invited all their friends, right? The one I think is fascinating is that the housewife probably, if her celebrations are like the loving father in the last parable, she ends up spending more money than that one coin was worth. You know. But it's about the celebration. It's about the relationships. It's about what you do when you're blessed. It's not about the value of the money. But this man only celebrates with himself. Did you notice something else about his conversation? Look at his conversation. What do you notice about his conversation? Tom's exactly right. He's talking to himself only. It's what I don't have my Bible here, but it's right. Somebody count how many times he says I to himself. You got 5, Missy? 4? Okay, yeah. 4. So 4 times he repeats himself, talking to himself. I. He's all about himself. He has this miraculous crop, one that nobody could anticipate. He's been blessed even more so, you could say, than the people in the parables of Luke 15 who find the lost. They celebrate the friends. He only talks to himself, and he only celebrates with himself. Well, the last question in the parable is, God says, those things you have prepared, whose will they be now? How would the crowd answer that question? I'm sorry, Paige?
Probably want a piece of it.
They want a piece of it, and that's who's going to get it, right? There's no family mentioned, right? Maybe he doesn't have any children. Or if he has children, maybe it's like these 2 young men who are talking and arguing with each other, and he's already X'd them out of the will. Who's going to get the miracle? Who was supposed to get it all along? The people. So the plot twist at the end is kind of is inferred. It's not really there. The parable starts a story that when God blesses you like this, it's supposed to be shared. And the man said, nope, this is just for me. But then he's dying, and before he dies, God says, now who's all this stuff's going to be? It's going to be for who it was intended for in the first place. You fool. Right? The plot twist comes at the end, right before the man dies. He thought, I'm going to retire. I'm going to have all this for myself, me, myself, and I. And God says, you fool. It was always supposed to be for the people, and you didn't share it. It's going to be for the people now. Because you're going to die, and someone's going to claim it. Now, isn't that fascinating? All right, let's look at the end of the story, the moral of the story, and then we're going to come back to what Al said in a second. So the parable has a little ending, as a lot of times we've seen the parables having, where Luke or Matthew try to give a statement at the end, a proverb of Jesus maybe, that kind of sums up the parable. And so verse 21 says this. So it is. Obviously, he's pointing out this statement is connected to the parable. This is a part of the moral of the story. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. This man had a miraculous harvest. He did what you're supposed to do when you have a miracle. You make a bold move. He tore his old barns down, built bigger ones because he could be like Pharaoh, as Joseph had told him, to prepare for the lean years ahead. But the story changes when he acts the opposite way that Joseph told Pharaoh to do. And then the story takes a twist at the end when God says, you know, it's going to go to the people it's supposed to go to anyways, just not the way I would have liked you to have shared it. So, and we realize he only has this conversation with himself, and one of the things he says is, now I can eat, drink, and be merry. Al brought that up earlier. This is a somewhat famous philosophical saying in Greek culture, which actually is quoted in the Bible. Isaiah 22:13, if you want to look it up for yourself, includes a statement, and it includes the whole statement. In the parable, it's not all there. Anybody know how the saying ends? Yes, thank you, Tom. Yes. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Tom. So, we have this philosophy. Live it up, because tomorrow we die. Now, notice that this man is called a fool. God didn't call him a sinner, wicked. He called him a fool. What's the difference? Or why do you think there's a difference? And again, there's not any right answer here. This is all just, we all got to figure out in our heads and figure out what. So what do you think's the difference? What difference does it make that God calls him a fool instead of a sinner or wicked?
The sinner knows that he's done wrong and needs to repent of what he's done. This guy didn't even realize what he's done.
Yeah. Didn't realize what he'd done? Okay. Thank you, Laney. What else? Yeah, Al?
There's a possibility that this rich man was not a farmer. He was an investor, had a lot of money. He didn't know what he was doing anyhow.
Okay. Maybe he was in over his head to begin with.
Right.
All right. Okay. What else?
But a rich man, I might add, would not go except that if he was truly a farmer would do things different.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So maybe a wiser farmer, not a fool farmer, would have handled the situation differently. Okay.
Well, he wasn't really being a sinner. He hadn't stolen from anyone else
That's right.
or anything like that.
If there was any sin he had, it was a sin of omission, not of commission. He didn't do anything wrong. He planted his crops, prepared things. This miracle happens to him. He didn't steal anything from anybody. If it was sin, it was a sin of omission, not something that he did. So fool may be more appropriate here, all right? Notice it didn't say God killed him. It says that night his life would be required, as if it's just his time. Who brought his death into focus? God doesn't say, I'm killing you tonight. God doesn't punish him for this. Who brought up his death? It's in the story. It's on his own lips. It's an Al saying, right? Self, now relax and eat, drink, and be merry. But he didn't finish it. He didn't finish the saying. He didn't finish the saying. It says, for tomorrow we may die. He's the one that brings up his own death. He is the one that calls the spirits of death down upon himself. He's the one that does it. God doesn't do this. Isn't that interesting? He brings his own death into the story, and lo and behold, God says, yep, tomorrow you'll die. This night your life's taken from you. You're a fool. You treated life frivolously, and even called up this saying of those who lived lavishly because they said, the point of life is, there's not really a point, just enjoy yourself because we're going to die someday. He brings up his own death, and sure enough, his life is required of him. And then God says, and who's going to get all this stuff? And the final plot twist comes into being. So how does this parable, the whole thing was framed with this argument between these two brothers. How does this parable answer their conflict? Say it again, Bill. They've got to figure out how not to be like this rich guy, right? Because Jesus is making the point, your life is not about this stuff you own or about this stuff you inherit from your parents. Your life is about these relationships. Tom? I could tell you want to say something.
No, I agree with that, but it strikes me that judging from the context within chapter 12, and particularly from the preceding chapter, it's all about Jesus, his woes to the Pharisees, and the Sadducees and scribes. And we come into chapter 12 with this crowd of thousands and so forth, and then the parable. To me, looking at the context, it may be that the rich man is a Pharisee or represents Pharisees, and particularly Sadducees, who were the richer of the two.
Right.
That Jesus just roils against all the time. And so, if you read through this entire parable, it makes sense to me that Jesus may have been the rich man was the Pharisees, and all through here, they squandered what the Pharisees and the religious leaders have kept for themselves, the treasures of the people, and did not really build up the people like they should have. And that's what Jesus was
Yeah.
constantly.
So here's what I would say with that, Tom. I think you're onto a neat idea with that story, and I could go two ways about it. Follow your path, or it could also be that the sins of the Pharisees and the scribes are not just their sins. They're also, all of us have those temptations. And the rich man may be a bridge from bridging the sins of the Pharisees and scribes into everybody else. But I like the thought about maybe the rich man was a Sadducee.
There are lots of verses and passages
Yeah, yeah. Good. What else? Thank you, Tom. So I like this idea to think about this bridge, that this Jesus is a bridge not just from sins of the religious people, but sins that we all have, because let's face it, we all have to face these sins of greed and not wanting to share with others our blessings. We do see that in religious leaders, in government leaders, in corporate leaders, but it does stretch to all of us. What else we come from this? How does this parable answer the brother's problem?
They're different back and forth to one another. One has the inheritance and one wants his part of it. So there's conflict there. Whereas there was conflict with the rich man because he had it and he wouldn't share it either.
Right, right. And it's also these brothers who realize they've just lost their parents, or at least their father. Life is short. It's also telling them, look, life's short between the two of you. Don't live life like this. Don't live your life like this. All right, anybody got a good moral of the story? What's the moral of the story? Al, what do you want to add?
One quick thought.
Yeah.
Don't spend all your time worrying about what you have in this life. The next life is what's important.
Okay. Don't spend worrying about this life. The next life's important. So how you live this life towards the next one is what's really important. Yeah.
Look out next year because you're going to have a bumper crop of maybe.
That's right. If that happens, don't tear down your barn. Just add a couple more and share them. Just share them with everybody, right? The whole story is about sharing your blessings, right? That's the key. When you get a blessing, share it. That's really the simple piece of the story. And this rich man, and that's why he's a fool. He chose his possessions over love and relationships. It's not so much that he's a sinner. What he did, if it's a sin of omission. But he's a fool. He could have had all sorts of friends celebrate with him, like the parables of Luke 15 do. And he only celebrates with himself. And then he calls in his own death with a statement. Yeah. All right. I think that's about it. Anybody have a last comment? Because we're getting close to time, I think. Or maybe we're not. My goodness, it's 10 minutes early. Good grief. People will want to do it all the time if I do that. That's the problem with these short parables. That's right. That's right. All right. I don't have anything else. But yeah, Tom.
Richard, what Al said, over a couple chapters.
Yeah.
A few chapters. Is Luke 16, verse 9.
It's in the dishonest manager?
I'm sorry.
The dishonest manager parable?
Well, yeah, it's true. Okay. But it's the same kind of thing. It says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone,
Yep.
you will be welcomed into eternal life.
Yeah, yeah. And that touched on what Al says, you know. So however we're blessed, use that to make the world a better place. That's what we're called to use. That's how we live the life of following Christ, so that then we end up with our life together in heaven. I don't think we can end much better than that. At Jay? You do. You keep on. Yeah. So keep those lottery tickets, and we'll expect you to share a big blessing. Thank you. Thank you all. This has been good. We got two more, and I'm working on. I'll announce maybe next week what we're going to do in March. But I think I am going to do some prayers of the Bible for 4 weeks in March. So, anyways, 2 more parables, and then we'll shift gears. Thank you.